Yes. Yeah.
Wherever you are.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Are you going to edit this? No.
So no cursing, huh? No swears.
We have
I think he's hooking up the live transmitter.
I'll find out.
Okay. Steve Smith. I think that the PA system.
About 10 seconds.
The PA system needs to be considerably louder.
Well, we'll find out once we get
Think you're up.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. We're ready to begin. Good evening. Can you hear me? Can the people in the back hear the microphone? Distorted? How's this?
We're trying to get the sound system up to par as quickly as possible. We're doing a live broadcast right now on KMCD here local, and we're also doing simulcasts on the internet, so we're trying to get all that coordinated.
So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this informational meeting on the year 2000 computer bug. My name is Brian Staines, and the Fairfield Y2K Action Group has invited me to serve moderator this evening. There's no single, reliable, complete expert or source of information on the Y2K computer bug, so there's a tremendous wide range of views on the issue. We'll need to bear that in mind this evening as we listen to each other and learn from each other. We're going to open first with some background and some news on the Y2K problem. Then we're going to hear from our featured speakers for the evening, and finally we'll entertain questions. As Michael mentioned, this event is being broadcast live on KMCD Radio, Kick 96. And on behalf of the residents of this area, I'd like to thank the Fairfield Y2K Action Group for sponsoring this event tonight. I'd like to thank the local media for covering it and for helping to keep us all informed about Y2K and progress in that area. And I'd like to thank the panel members for taking the time to come this evening. Let me introduce our panel members. To my left is Tom Shepard. He's Chief Financial Officer for Information Technology Services, which is the Enterprise Information Technology Agency in the Iowa State government. Among his many, many other duties, he's the project officer responsible for the operation of the State of Iowa Year 2000 project. And this includes oversight of monthly progress reporting for state agencies, validation and verification of 2000 computer code changes, and Year 2000 special project work. He has 25 years of experience in computer operations, and we're very happy to have him with us this evening. Also on our panel this evening, we have Ed Malloy of the Fairfield City Council, and we have some members of the Fairfield Y2K Action Group. Sitting between Tom and Ed, we have Mark Cope, and on this side we have Malachi Clark and Michael Clark. Thank you for coming. I'd like to turn it over now to Mark Cope for a few minutes, who'll tell us a little bit about the Y2K Action Group, and then we'll go to the news with Michael and Malachi.
News.
Mark?
Good evening. As you know, we've been meeting for several weeks now discussing Y2K as a topic, and there have been there's been a lot of response in terms of positive response and critical response in the community. And the Fairfield Y2K Action Group felt it was time to set up a mission statement so the community would understand where we interface with other members, other organizations, and local government in our community. So what we did was get together and draft a mission statement that would let you know what Fairfield Y2K Action Group's intentions were. I'd like to read that to you now. Our mission statement is composed of 3 different areas. The first area is what we call prudent planning. To plan and assist others in planning for a community-wide long-term emergency preparedness to create self-sufficiency, abundance, and charity within the community so that the community can sustain the life of its individuals in an emergency or natural disaster without having to experience desperation, survivalism, or any other social dysfunction on our local level. The second part, basic needs, to promote contingency plans for emergencies that provide for sufficient food, water, heat, and medical needs to sustain the individuals in the community for any emergency where supply lines are cut off for a period of up to 3 months. The third portion is year 2000 Millennium Bug Planning, to promote emergency preparedness for any potential year 2000 Millennium Bug repercussions, just as one would plan contingencies for any natural disaster as follows. 1. Inform without panicking the community about the existence of the Y2K problem. This is a really important one. Our intention has never been to scare people. Our intention has never been to create some sort of fervor or bank runs or any sort of emotion that freezes the community. What we do want to do is prepare the community for any possible repercussion that does happen so that we do have the ability to function and have an abundance and charity that allows that to continue. The second is our intention is to provide answers. We'd like to provide emergency preparedness planning information for food, water, heat, and medical needs for distribution to the Fairfield, Jefferson County community to help individuals and organizations prepare their own contingency plans. We also would like to shore up contingency plan implementation. We want to work with and support existing community organizations and local government toward long-term emergency preparedness, contingency planning, until the community is prepared. So our scope is a little bit broader than just year 2000 Millennium Bug, although that's the most, that's the concern at the forefront now. What we need to do is prepare as a community so that we can survive natural disasters as have occurred in Toronto or in Maine. Toronto was 2 months, Maine was 5 weeks. How do people make it through? Well, we want to plan, we want to line those ducks up. As a result, our action group has 14 committees, has many members on the steering committee, has 100 volunteers, and we're starting to move. And we'd like to thank you all for your help in that direction. Thank you.
Good news?
It depends on how you look at that one.
So more. How about our phone system? The Telco Year 2000 Forum, a group of local and regional telephone companies working on a Year 2000 information disclosure in the spirit of President Clinton's and Congress's wishes to promote more high-tech information sharing, reported only 7 minor problems encountered in approximately 1,000 test cases. The group's members include Ameritech Corporation, Bell Atlantic Corporation, Bell South Corporation, Cincinnati Bell, GTE, that's us, SBC Communications Inc., Southern New England Telephone, and U.S. West. There are 2,000 test cases planned in all, but out of the half performed so far, these 7 problems were referred to equipment vendors, and prompt resolution has been obtained on some and is expected on others, the group said. So that looks really good for the telecommunications industry. So that's some good news from there. That's off of CNN.
Yeah. At least locally, that does help us out.
What else? Local. The SEC. You wanted to do something on this too, yes? The Securities Exchange Commission last week took its first disciplinary actions against 37 brokerage firms for failing to file disclosure reports on the year 2000 projects. There were approximately 5,600 firms, 59 were reprimanded, 37 firms were actually fined, but some of that still in litigation.
Right.
There were 19 firms actually that have been fined at this point, somewhere between $5,000 and $25,000.
Just good. Poke them in the right place, and hopefully they'll fix their problems.
You got to speak up. There you go.
Better, hopefully.
Maybe a little bit. Gallup Poll, sponsored by Wells Fargo last month, revealed that 75% of small businesses in the United States aware of the Y2K problem had yet to assess their millennium vulnerability, and half had no immediate plans to do so. That's a little more grim information, so we need to get that going. On the lighter half of that, the Small Business Association, meanwhile, is working to get resources in place to help the small businesses that heed its Y2K warnings. The SBA is running a Y2K website, it's sba.gov/Y2K, with a link to its database of contractors. Small businesses can use the SBA's database to search for contractors by location, capability, and other factors. So that's really good, a trade of information to help small businesses get more compliant. Businesses is a big deal. The latest thing in retailers, there was a, I'll just quote this, "Retail businesses are more vulnerable than utilities and governments they depend on," said Kathy Hotka, Vice President of Information Technology at the National Retailing Federation. So they're saying that businesses are more vulnerable than utilities and governments. It's the things outside of our control that we worry about the most. Montgomery Ward's. Representatives from several leading retailers at the conference described their efforts to minimize damage from the year 2000 problems of others. Quotes are from The Gap, Home Depot, Sears and Roebuck, JCPenney's, Goody's Family Clothing. They're all saying that they're on track, but they're really worried about outside companies. Their suppliers is where the problem really is. This is the largest part of the problem. If you get an early start, if you got an early start, you are now addressing the readiness of those you depend on. So these companies that have been doing this for several years are now stopping focusing on themselves because they feel that they are relatively compliant, and focusing on their distributors. Because as we know, things like Home Depot and even Walmart, if their suppliers aren't producing, they aren't making money, and therefore they have a problem. So that's what's going on now.
To that same note, the U.S. Postal Service as saying that they're doing quite well, even though there's an increasing concern. They're expecting a surge of mail to occur right after Y2K in concerns to any problems that might occur. But they're saying that they're right on track to be finished, but that they are concerned deeply about their 15,000 suppliers, people who make meters, telephone companies, all of the companies that handle their financial transactions, especially with the Treasury Department and other financial institutions, as far as getting the money, because they're a private organization. They're not a government organization.
So local governments are also getting in line and producing further information for their people. In Lubbock, Texas, the city will soon produce flyers to include in the water bills going out to everybody in the city. Direct quote, "In every way possible, just making sure that citizens understand what we're doing, as well as some of the things they might want to consider personally to prepare for any interruption in service." And applause for the Lubbock, Texas government in taking a step forward and informing their population.
Yeah. On a downside, it has started recently that actually, for quite some time, people have all been, a great majority of companies have been saying that they'll be done by January 1st, 1999 and begin testing, or they'll be done with their code remediation. That date's coming quite rapidly, and the first of what many in the industry are thinking is going to be a long list of power companies has said that we are not going to make that deadline for testing. And in fact, the Bangor Hydro Plant from Bangor, Maine, has said it will not hit its December 1998 compliance deadline, and that it will take up to 3 months longer to get that deadline.
And the other half of that,
a little on the bad news.
From Nevada Power Company, "We feel confident that our operations will not be interrupted by year 2000 issues. We began working on the year 2000 issue in 1994. They were less confident about the status of their suppliers. Once again, the power grid issue and the fact that utilities are dependent on each other. A quote from our wonderful local power people. We're cutting our time short here, so we'll try and do the best we can to get through the last little bit of what we have here. Pamela Wegner, an executive vice president of Alliant Corporation, Wisconsin Power and Light Company, and commission member said, the state needs to work with local governments to develop a network of safe havens where people can go if essential services such as power and gas and water are disrupted by year 2000 computer problems. Knowing there will be a place in their community where they can go to be warm and have food and water if something goes wrong will allow people to focus on what they can do in their own households to prepare for those problems, Wagner said. What scares people now is thinking they're alone in this. Wagner said of the safe havens, which she compared to shelters set up in advance of hurricanes. She said practical approaches by consumers to potential problems would be to buy some extra food and stock up on firewood in households with fireplaces. We're working very hard to make sure this is a non-event, but we won't know until January 1st, 2000, said Wagner, who oversees her company's year 2000 readiness efforts. Wagner stressed Wednesday that her company and other utilities in Wisconsin can do all they can to prepare for the year 2000, but because utilities are so interconnected, another company's lack of readiness in another state could cause problems here. It is not possible for Wisconsin to be ready and to be okay. This is a direct quote from Pamela Wegner, an executive vice president of Alliant Corporation. Some final notes.
Little global news. For those of you who don't know, that even if the U.S. is completely compliant, 80% of the code in the world lies outside of the United States boundaries. We have no control of this code as a country. And so even if we are compliant, we still rely on other nations, of which Russia is one of them. And Alexander Krupnov, who's the chief state communication committee for the Russian Federation, has said, quote, not a single government ruble will be spent on Y2K because the budget is empty. That does not fare well for Russia.
Some additives in that same part of the world. China, the China Economic Times reported last week that the State Council has ruled that all government computer systems must be fixed by March, with all Millennium testing completed by September. Agencies missing the deadline will be subject to punishment. A direct quote here, while officials are unclear about exactly what that might entail, you can bet it means more than working nights and weekends. Japan, a national survey of 2,000 small and medium-sized companies conducted by the Trade Ministry in September showed 33% had done nothing to deal with the problem. A similar survey showed 60% of firms in Japan had done nothing about the problem.
Canada has named this as their biggest threat to national security, and such, they are imposing a no holiday rule between December 27th and March 15th. They're possibly going to recall all military units and tell them they can't go on vacation. No New Year's parties.
Yep. The Philippines, President Joseph Estrada has ordered officials to undertake a comprehensive audit of computer systems in all government offices to determine whether they are susceptible to the bug. So this is them now getting started. One last thing, Malaysia.
Sure. Go for it.
Has now allocated 100 million Malaysian dollars toward their Y2K issue. The computer industry in Malaysia is now saying the portion is too small to address the Y2K problem among government agencies and are recommending double that number. To give you an idea of how much money they're spending, that's 100 million of their dollars. It's 4,000 of their dollars to buy an entry-level multimedia internet-ready personal computer. Yes, that's $379 million in U.S. currency. One last thing is the airlines. Yeah, I did say it's one last thing. Dutch airline KLM said recently that it will be Y2K ready, but it may have to ground part of its fleet on December 31st, 99 because some airports and air traffic control systems may not be compliant. They say directly, we don't trust the government. So So there you have it, our quick report.
Yeah, I think that's us.
Thank you, Michael and Mel.
Well, thank you, Brian.
You want to just pause for a second so you can switch mics? Yeah. Try to get rid of this buzz.
So he's going to switch mics, and so we're pausing.
Wait, hang on. He's still not done yet.
Good try. Can you hear me?
That's better.
We need this mic.
Yeah? No? Except you can't hear us now.
I think he shut us off.
Are we dead?
As he works feverishly.
We're taking a moment to let it settle in. Yes, all
Maybe this equipment is not October 28th compliant.
Yeah. Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
Yeah.
Check 1 2.
Oh, well.
Check 1 2.
Are we back online?
Yeah.
A little better.
We'd now like to hear from our guest speaker of the evening, Mr. Tom Shepard, Project Officer of the State of Iowa Year 2000 Project.
Thank you and good evening. I'm really happy to be here in Fairfield. I told several of the panelists that as I grew up, I spent every summer in Fairfield. My both grandparents lived in Fairfield, and so I'm really happy to be back. Before I start my comments, I just want to respond to these two gentlemen. I don't think punishing government officials on year 2000 is a good idea. Is that better? Yes. Okay. I'll stand here by the mic then and make sure I do that. I want to tell you some things about the State of Iowa's Year 2000 program. And I won't have a long presentation, but I'll be happy to take questions if you have any. First thing I want to tell you is that the State of Iowa Year 2000 program is structured differently than any other state's Year 2000 program. We discussed this when we first got into the Year 2000 issue, and we actually formalized our Year 2000 project office back in 1996. The average state has assessed their Year 2000 problem and hired a vendor or vendors to come in and fix it. And the vendor or vendors that fix it then have their work checked by the state's subject matter experts, the folks that wrote the systems in the first place. Well, it seemed to us at the State of Iowa that it didn't make a lot of sense to hire outside help to come in, learn our systems, and fix our systems, and then at the same time working with our subject matter experts. It seemed to us that we needed to have the subject matter experts, the folks that wrote the systems, fix the systems, and bring in outside help to do independent validation and verification, to look at every single line of code that was fixed, to validate, first of all, that the work that was done was actually address the Year 2000 problem, and to verify that all the work was done. So our program works just a little bit differently than everybody else's. As a result, we're starting to look at differences in our ability to complete work. We're looking at the integrity of the work that we're completing, and we feel that we're getting a much higher level grade product. When we first assessed systems at the State of Iowa, we found we had about 60 million lines of computer code in mainframes, mid-ranges, and personal computers out there. As we started to look at that 60 million lines of computer code, particularly on the mainframes, we saw programming libraries with lots of copies of the same thing in it. Computer programmer would make a change to a program and would keep the last generation of that program and make a change and make a change. And we found in some cases we had 15 and 20 generations of the same program. So we went through the programming libraries, and our programming people affectionately called blowing the gas out of the libraries, blowing all the excess copies out. And that brought our problem down to 35 million lines of code. So it made a dramatic change in what we had to fix. Then we looked at all the things that we were doing, and you won't believe this, but sometimes government starts doing things and we continue to do things even though we don't need to do it. It came as a real shock and surprise to us. So we got to looking at the things, number one, what are we doing that we need to continue to do? Number two, what are we doing that we need to stop doing? And number two, what aren't we doing that we need to start? So we started to look at all those kinds of things. Well, the computer programs that we had an average age on them of somewhere around 11 and a half years. Now, in the last 11 and a half years, as you notice in information technology, we get new generations of technology right now on the order of every 15 to 18 months. We get generational changes that fast. So it was reasonable to assume that in some cases we're not doing things we need to start. There's probably off-the-shelf software that we can get to do that. And we found a fair number of those things. And we found a fair number of off-the-shelf software products that were already year 2000 compliant. So we started to implement those. We looked at retiring a number of programs. We retired about 18% of the programming library. About 18% of everything we did was something that we could either do in a different way or something we could stop doing altogether. In some cases, when we had questions, we just stopped doing it to see if anybody noticed. And nobody did, so we just left it. Now, I think this is progressive government myself. I come from a field of thought that, and I realize this is a pretty weird concept coming from somebody who's worked for the government for 25 years, but things should make sense. If they don't make sense, stop doing it. So that's really the philosophy that we've taken. So what we did was we told every state agency out there, you have to have your own year 2000 program. And your year 2000 program will detail your programs, will detail all your lines of code, and you will give us a timeline and milestones that get you to full year 2000 compliance by March 1st, 1999. So when we hired our vendor partner to come in and do the independent validation and verification, we had our vendor partner review all the year 2000 programs to see if they looked valid. We had some agencies that were extraordinarily optimistic. We had some agencies that frankly just didn't have all the details. And so we went through and helped all those agencies make sure their year 2000 program was as good as it could be. The next thing we did was we went and we got some legislation that allowed the year 2000 program office a rather unusual power in government. As you can imagine, if you're a state agency director, you have a number of things your state agency does. And you have discretion over what programs you do, what kind of activities you undertake. The year 2000 program office in the state of Iowa has the authority, if the state agency is working year 2000 and they don't have resources, either be it money or people to do that, they come to the year 2000 project office and request resources. We need more money, we need people, we need whatever. At the point they come to us and ask us for resources, we have the authority to review everything they do. Every single thing they do in their budget. If we feel they're doing something discretionary, they're doing something they would just like to do, and not something that they are obligated to do, we say stop doing that and put the money to year 2000. The governor's office has backed us up on that 100%. The governor of the state of Iowa owns the year 2000 program. When the governor meets with agency heads on a regular basis, and it's beginning to get a little old to some folks, but the very first thing he asked, he said, "Hi, how are you, and how's your year 2000 program?" And he wants to know details. And that's real important to have top-down management commitment, and our governor is very committed to this. So when we have the authority to look at your budget, and we have the authority to make some decisions. Now, ours is not the final arbitration. If they say, no, that's something we have to do, they take that to the governor's office. The governor and his staff is the final arbiter of what is discretionary and what is not. But I've got news for you. A lot of agencies will say, let's just make it work before we have to go to the big guy or his boss, because they just don't want that discretionary decision. We report on a monthly basis. This is one of the things we do in the state of Iowa that doesn't happen a lot of other places. But we actually have 3 reports on a monthly basis. The first report is a roll-up report for every state agency out there, and these reports are color-coded. Your agency gets a green, a yellow, or a red. If you get a green, that means that you are on schedule or ahead of schedule. If you get a yellow, that means that you are behind schedule up to 5%. If you get a red, that means you're more than 5% behind schedule. If in any month in any of these 3 reports, and you'll see at the top of that report, that one's red. That happens to be the Civil Rights Commission. Any time you are not green, you go to the governor's office and explain why. The second thing you do is you explain what you're going to do to get green by the end of this month. Period, case closed, end of story. And you put the resource on it that you need to put on it to make sure that your agency is on schedule. So we have, this is an overall roll-up for everything year 2000. This is a mainframe mid-range report, and this talks about mainframe and mid-range systems. And in this particular case, the Civil Rights Commission is 40% behind schedule. Well, what happened with the Civil Rights Commission, they have an AS400 system. They made a number of changes. They made the same, there's a minor technical error in all the modules they corrected. So when we went through and did validation and verification, we found the problem, and we removed credit for having that work complete. Now they're going through it. It actually took them about 5 days at the beginning of this month, the beginning of October, to fix all those things. So they're going to get 40% credit back again, and they're going to be green in November. But this is a very easy to read chart. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out if you're yellow, green, or red. And we have details about why those colors are what they are. Now we present this to the legislature. There's a legislative oversight committee that is in charge of the money. We thought that was probably a good place to place this particular report. The legislative oversight committee gets this, the governor's office gets this, Department of Management gets this, and the agencies get this. The other report we have is a color-coded report, and that is for personal computers, because there are some additional issues with personal computers. We broke those out separately. On this report, there is also a fourth color. There's a blue. That means you're finished. And with personal computers right now, we have 4 agencies that are blue. We have one agency that's red, and that is the Iowa Telecommunication Technology Commission, the ICN. And what happened to the ICN this month is they had to pull people off PCs and put them on some ICN technical problems. They're implementing a technology called ATM. That doesn't have anything to do with money machines, by the way. That's called asynchronous transfer mode. It's a much higher speed transfer protocol for the fiber optic network. They move people off to get that done. They have promised the governor's office that moving those people back the first 3 weeks of October put them back to green again. So we have a very careful check and balance of where we are in state government with each agency. The Oversight Committee, in addition to looking at the executive branch, also has oversight and appropriations oversight for the Legislative Council, for the legislature itself, and for the courts and for the elected officials. In May of this year, the Year 2000 Project Office, which is an executive branch group, was put in the unenviable position through legislation of overseeing the Year 2000 projects in all the elected officials' offices, in the legislative branch, and in the courts. And the first noise that was made is that it's unconstitutional. You're abridging the various areas of government. And we said, well, we're not out to cause any constitutional issues. All we want to find out about is Year 2000. So we went into each of those agencies, we did a quick assessment, we gave them some things they needed to fix, some things they needed to address, and we are working with them now on making sure that their Year 2000 issues are being brought up to speed. Year 2000 problem, as you've heard, is comprised actually of 2 major components. You have information technology issues, which are computer issues, computer programs and programming libraries and data. And you have the embedded chip or the embedded systems issues, where you have the computer chips that exist in all kinds of things. There are estimated to be about 25 billion embedded computer chips in use in the world today. If you sort all that out, about 10% of those actually do a lot of processing based on dates, and they expect 10% of those to fail on January 1, 2000. So we need to find and isolate those kinds of things, find out what kind of problems that's going to cause. One of the big problems we've had with Year 2000, one of the things you may have encountered if you look at Year 2000 issues, is that there are all kinds of stories and there are all kinds of hyperbole about things that will or will not happen. There was testimony before Congress in March 1997, and this well-meaning consultant talked to the Congress about a microwave oven that was programmed on December 31st, 1999, and when it rolled over to the year 2000, the microwave oven wouldn't work again. Nobody has ever been able to find that microwave oven. I have never seen a microwave oven in my entire history that you put the year in. Okay? Most of the stuff I cook is on the order of minutes. So you've got to sort out what the truth is, and you got to sort out where the stories are coming from. And that's really been one of the most difficult things that we've done. We have, as I told you, this is an information technology project. We also have our vendor partner, CTA Incorporated. They're the company that does the validation and verification of all of our year 2000 stuff. They are also helping us on the embedded system side, to look at the embedded systems within the state of Iowa, institutions within the state of Iowa infrastructure. Those are things like traffic control systems, because traffic control systems in a lot of cases have dates embedded in them. They have days of the week. The traffic control systems in the city of Des Moines, a lot of other cities, operate differently at rush hour Monday through Friday than they do on Saturday and Sunday. And so they inherently have dates built into them, so they have a calendar, they can tell what day of the week it is. Parking lot lights, security systems, elevators. Elevators are date sensitive. The reason for that is elevators have to be serviced on a regular basis, and we're all glad for that. Elevators have maintenance computers that attach to them. When maintenance is done, the actual date and time of the maintenance and a code for the maintenance is put into the maintenance computer. If too much time passes between maintenance intervals, the elevator goes to the bottom floor and shuts itself off. Well, there are going to be some elevators on January 1, 2000 go to the bottom floor and shut themselves off. If you're an office worker that does steps, it may be an inconvenience for you, but you're going to be okay. If you're in a wheelchair, you are seriously inconvenienced by the fact the elevator doesn't work. So that's going to be a problem. We found Caterpillar equipment, earth movers, snow throwers, fire trucks, things with large engines. The engine itself, in a lot of these cases, in the case of a Caterpillar, we have an actual instance where the DOT had leased a Caterpillar earth mover. And they had a surge, electrical surge, from a problem with the battery, and it wiped out the maintenance computer information. It just cleared it. So they called the Caterpillar maintenance guy out. He looked at it, said, okay, reloaded the maintenance information into the maintenance computer. They started it, started right off. Not a problem. Well, the guy that operates the Caterpillar had a son who was a computer programmer at the DOT. And his son is working on year 2000 stuff. And he said, well, is that computer year 2000 compliant? This actually happened about a year and a half ago. And the Caterpillar maintenance engineer said, I don't know. So he used the maintenance computer to advance the clock to December 31st, 1999 at 11:58. They shut the thing off. 4 minutes later, the engine would not start because the computer rolled over to 1900. Now, when we got to Caterpillar and asked them, do you have fixes for those kinds of things? They don't have, or didn't have at last check, year 2000 compliant computers. But guess what? Computers are amoral machines. You can lie to them. They don't care. So you can regress all the maintenance information 30 years. So January 1, 2000 looks like January 1, 1970, and the thing starts just fine. It's a valid workaround. You have to know it's going to happen to you, and you have to put the workaround in place before December 31st. Guess what? If you have a major snowstorm, New Year's Eve, if the guy can actually get to the snowplow, that's always the question, how's the guy get to the snowplow? But anyway, if the guy gets to the snowplow, will the snowplow start? You know, is there a maintenance computer that will prevent it from starting? We've looked at the scenario, let's say we have some major computer crashes, and we call people into the building January 1, year 2000, and then the security system in the building rolled over. They got there, but they can't get in the building. So we've looked at all these kinds of things. We have an embedded systems project within the state of Iowa, and we have classified embedded systems in 4 different classes. The first class is any embedded system that, if it fails, is an imminent danger to life and property. One of those kinds of systems are the time locks on doors in penitentiaries. We think that's real important. We have also systems that are on, if you have electronically controlled mechanical valves, like in sewage stations. There are some valves that fail open. If the system fails, they automatically open. There are some valves that fail closed. Well, we found through some testing that there are some valves in some sewage control facilities that will fail open and dump raw sewage into the rivers if the dates aren't correct. Now, we haven't tested the embedded systems. We just know that the failure mode will cause some serious problems. So now we're going in and verifying and validating those embedded systems. But the state of Iowa in and of itself, the state government, we're on track to get our information technology problems solved by the end of March 1999. Our embedded systems are on target right now for October 1, 1999. It's going to take a little bit longer to get those things done. We have a lot of repetitive systems, as you can imagine. We have a lot of the same kind of equipment. Mike used the example of the fires being put out in Kuwait because people shared information. Well, we are sharing a lot of information. As a matter of fact, the piece of legislation that he referred to, the Year 2000 Information and Readiness Disclosure Act, I have some copies of it here. I'll leave 4 or 5 copies here. But it talks about if you disclose information about your Year 2000 readiness, that can't really be used against you in court. Now, it doesn't get rid of the due diligence factor. You still have to work your issues. But by virtue of the fact you disclosed information, one of the problems we've had with utility companies is that they don't answer surveys because of the liability issue. Well, this was just signed into law about 8 or 9 days ago. So hopefully this will alleviate some of those problems. I think one of government's roles in this is to compel utility companies and to compel companies in the supply stream to disclose information and tell us what you're doing and help us help you. And I think that's one of the things that go on. I assume everybody here is familiar with Alliant Energy. It's pretty okay, that's on the tip of everybody's tongue. Yesterday I talked to, I believe the lady you quoted is the Year 2000 person for Alliant, Wisconsin. This gentleman is a guy by the name of Bob Newell. He is the Year 2000 Compliance Director for Alliant Energy. He's the overall guy. He reports directly to the CEO of Alliant Energy. And he gave a presentation in Des Moines yesterday to the Iowa Utilities Board. And his presentation was actually on behalf of the North American Electric Reliability Council. There is a council of electric utilities, and this council is solely formed for the reliability of electric utilities. And here's what the gentleman from Alliant told me that people should be doing, as far as people should be persuading their own utility companies to do. The North American Electric Reliability Council has recommendations that every utility should complete an inventory of embedded systems by no later than September 30th of this year. Every utility should have their assessment complete by October 31st of this year. Every utility should have remediation and testing finished on all those systems by June 30th of 1999. And every utility, according to this council, should have the implementation of all the fixes finished by no later than July 31st, 1999. And he told us that he would encourage us to encourage our citizens to get to their utility companies and encourage them to follow the NAERC guidelines. So I would encourage you to get onto the internet, www.nerc.com. That is their website. They take email at that address. And see if you can find out through that website where your utility is. And I encouraged Bob Newell at some point to come to Fairfield, because I said the people in Fairfield are looking for answers. And he seemed to be a guy that had a lot of answers. So I think it would be good for him to come here and tell you what he knows about Alliant Energy and the North American Electric Reliability Council. I didn't know they existed until yesterday. And so I think that was really good information to get from him. One of the things that we found out in the Year 2000 project office, we were concerned with some of the white knuckle kind of things, Year 2000. One of the questions on our mind were the reliability and safety systems in nuclear power plants. Now, we've done a lot of research independently, and we've also talked to the industry, and we have found out that the reliability and safety systems in nuclear power plants are typically always analog systems, and they are not date reliant. They are called, what do they call them? Y2K inert. So, and I think that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to make your community Y2K inert. You're trying to make sure that you don't have, and by the way, I try to always refer to this as Year 2000 as opposed to Y2K, because abbreviating that got us in trouble in the first place. So, I'm going to try to use Year 2000 as much as possible. Beyond that, there are two other additional comments that I'd like to make. One of the things that we are doing, we're trying to make sure that in addition to working our problems and issues in state government, that state government tries to help you get information whenever possible, and that's why I'm here. And we also have a Year 2000 outreach project that is being operated through the Manufacturing Technology Center of the Iowa State University Extension Service. In Jefferson County, the phone number for the Extension Service, and they have people who have year 2000 experience, you can get year 2000 speakers, you can get information and advice. They are at 472-4166. The director of the year 2000 outreach program at the Manufacturing Technology Center is a gentleman by the name of Willem Bakker. And if anybody wants Willem's phone number, it is area code 515-965-7040. And we've been partnering with the Manufacturing Technology Center to try to get more information. I get asked two questions a lot. One question is, where are you going to be January 1, 2000? Not going to be in a plane. And it's only because I just bought a house, I'm going to be in my house. So I'm going to be at home, and I'm not going to take any special precautions other than the fact that I'll lay in some bacon and some stuff I can put in the microwave. My microwave is going to work. My refrigerator is going to work. I have no doubt about it. The gas log on my fireplace, I'm pretty sure it's going to work, so I'm going to just rely on that. The other question I get asked is, what's my biggest concern? As a year 2000 project officer in state government, I deal with this stuff day in, day out. I am privy to a lot of information that, in some cases, I don't want to disclose publicly, but I feel obligated to. And my biggest concern right now is the federal government. It's not the entire federal government, but, and the question may be, okay, what about the federal government concerned about? I don't know. That's what I'm concerned about. The federal government has a huge year 2000 problem, as you might understand. They've got a massive year 2000 problem. The federal government got into the year 2000 remediation and testing and implementation issue pretty late in the game. The federal government has an issue right now that's much bigger than their resources can address. So if you are faced with a situation that is beyond your capability to fully address, if you have a massive bunch of injured people, you triage those folks. You take care of the worst ones first. Well, the federal government right now is in the process of triaging systems. They are taking a look at what's going to break and what effect that will have and what damage that will cause. That's a good thing for them to do. I encourage them to continue to do that. The problem is that, from the best information we have at the year 2000 Project Office of the State of Iowa, is that they're not going to disclose to us what's going to break until sometime next year. We're not sure what's not going to be remediated. What we have done as a tactic, what we've done as a strategy with all of our systems is that, in addition to fixing year 2000 problems inside your programs, we also have mandated that you bridge data into your programs and out. For years, we've accepted data as it is, and we process the data. Well, now we're going to bridge data in. If we use a 4-digit year, we can't assume everybody's going to use a 4-digit year. We're going to get a lot of busted data. So we have to analyze the data before we ever bring it in and process it. So we're going to analyze everything in, we're going to bridge it in, we're going to look at it. If it's 2-digit years, we're going to make it 4-digit years. We're going to apply some logic to it, and we're going to make some assumptions based on the data, and we're going to make it 4-digit years. We're going to try to fix the data and then bring it in and process it. And we're also going to bridge data out. Now, we can have fixed systems all day long. We can do processing internal to the state of Iowa all day long, and it won't be a problem for anybody else. But guess what? If we transfer data to a busted federal system, we have to break the data before we send it out. We have to chop the first 2 digits off the year. So we bridge data in and we bridge data out. Now, that's going to add somewhere around 20 to 25% to our processing costs. The good news is that processing on mainframes and mid-ranges and PCs is getting less and less expensive every year. So we're going to be able to take approximately the same budget that we've had for the last couple of years and be able to accommodate this bump in processing without a corresponding increase in the amount of money. I think one of the statistics I read I thought was particularly interesting is that if the automobile industry had kept pace with the information technology industry since 1975, a Mercedes-Benz would cost $1.49 and get 67,000 miles to the gallon of gas. So we're going to rely on the fact that we have very robust technology to be able to do that. But it's going to be burdensome for us to bridge data in and bridge data out. And the federal government is really the issue right now that we have. My mother's 80 years old and blind, and she asked me, am I going to get my Social Security check? I said, well, ask me that a different way. She said, how's Social Security doing? I said, Social Security's doing great. They are the most with-it agency in the federal government. They have got the year 2000 whipped. They have a year 2000 program that is second to none. The Social Security agency is probably further ahead than any other federal agency on year 2000, bar none. So she said, okay, answer my question. Am I going to get my Social Security check? I said, well, the Treasury's got some problems. See, Social Security sends their data to the Treasury to get the checks out. And so we're working on all those kinds of issues. We're working on benefit transfers and all kinds of things. We are actually formulating a proposal right now. We don't know how it's going to go over, but we draw down money from the federal government to be able to give benefits, state benefits in some cases. And we're asking the federal government, if you don't think the Treasury problems are fixed, can we draw down money 6 months in advance? Well, that's hundreds of billions of dollars by the time everybody does it. So we're going to try to do what we can do, and we're going to try to make sure everybody's informed. And one of the things that I do, in addition to being a chief financial officer and in addition to being the year 2000 guy and a public information officer, I'm the governor's lobbyist on technology issues. And the dirtiest trick you can use in the lobbying book is to go to the citizens. So we're saying you can do. If I can mobilize a whole bunch of you, the legislature doesn't stand a chance. So that's exactly what we're prepared to do with the federal government. If we think we're going to start to encounter problems with the feds, we're going to go to you. And we're going to tell you what to do and where to go and what to write. And we're going to ask you for that help. With that, I'll tell you a little bit about the money, and then I'm finished with my prepared comments. I'll take any questions, and I think the rest of the group will. You might ask, what's it costing? The state of Nebraska, this is an interesting comparison. We looked at the state of Nebraska very carefully because they have almost identically the same amount of computer code we have. But they're following the model where they're hiring it done and then having their folks go in and check it later. The state of Nebraska is spending $46.8 million on their year 2000 problem. State of Iowa, for a virtually identical number of lines of code, a virtually identical problem, is spending $33 million for our problem. So the way we're doing it is different. We're doing it for less money. And guess what? Our validation and verification is in line with the process by an independent auditor. A very large insurance company in the city of Des Moines told us that their year 2000 project was way ahead of schedule and they were feeling really good about things. And I said, but your problem is your progress is self-reporting. The computer programmers are telling you what they got done and you're going, okay. The state of Iowa, we fix a program, we test the program, then we test the system. There might be 5 or 6 programs in a line. We test the system, the whole group of programs, and then we do what's called a data path test. We start where the data begins, no matter where that is, and we test every program from where it begins to where it ends. That's a huge amount of testing. But we've automated all of it. It's all on little tabletop Spark workstations. And we've automated everything. I got news for you. When we come out of this, we'll have better computer programming because we've automated our testing. We've automated our validation and verification process. We told this insurance company, and for fear of being sued, I'm not going to say who it is, but we told them, you need to do that. And I said, just take a small system where you've remediated some programs and check it. Just run it through our automated test. The system failed. So they took a bigger system and ran it through our automated test. Those systems failed. They were done with their year 2000 program on Labor Day of this year. Their new year 2000 program will be finished Labor Day of next year because they're doing it all over again. But that's the good news. $33 million for the state of Iowa. As an interesting aside, the United States Navy is spending $421 million. The state of California is spending about $247 million, and they're spending $500 million on embedded systems. And the kicker, the one that just really hits me right where it hurts, Mars Candy Company expects to spend $600 million on year 2000 remediation because they have a different business unit for every country in the world. And they have a huge number of computer systems. So candy bars will increase in price. I'm here to tell you. I want to break the news to you first. We don't expect tax increases as a result. The interesting thing about it is most utility companies have also said they do not expect a rate increase based on year 2000. Now, I don't know if that means that they don't get it yet, or that they have it well in hand, and that's what we need to sort out in the coming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we'd like to hear from Ed Malloy, our Fairfield City Councilman. If you'd like to come up.
Thank you very much. I first want to thank Mr. Shepard on behalf of the city for coming down here this evening. I feel very comforted to know that we have, or that the governor appointed someone of his abilities and stature to oversee this situation for the state. And the governor may own it, but I don't know what term we give to it if Mr. Shepard doesn't own it as well. So thank you very much. I want to give you a brief report on what Fairfield has talked about and where we are in considering our situation at this point. And I'll try to be brief because I know that there are probably a lot of questions that members of the audience have, and they would probably be best directed to Mr. Shepard with his expertise here tonight. But at the last meeting that I attended, I think there was really a void in terms of where the information was, and I think that the updates that we've received tonight have been very, very helpful, and I think we're really realistically prepared to look at the challenges that we may face. So what I did in the interim, along with John Brown, our city manager, and Tom Thompson, who was our 3rd Ward councilman, is that we called a meeting of all of the department heads of the city. We also invited the police chief, fire chief, hospital administrator, Mr. Walt Brownlee, to a meeting. And what we wanted to do is just kind of assess how much any of those departments had considered their liabilities, thought about it, or are in the process of working on the problem. And I felt that the meeting was very, very good in that virtually everyone had given consideration to the problem. I think as it was broken down for us earlier, we have the first level of the problem, which is programming. And I'm kind of happy to report that I think Fairfield is going to basically get by cleanly in terms of programming. There isn't anything that we're dependent on that is program code that would really be date sensitive or we would need to change or to amend. Where we probably are most vulnerable is in the area of the embedded systems. So there are a lot of question marks there, and what we did was we took an inventory sheet that was provided by an organization called Y2K and U, which is sponsored by an organization. Actually, it's a group of organizations, one being the National League of Cities, the National Association of Counties, the National Association, I believe, of City Managers. And this organization has put together a packet, an information packets for counties and municipalities. We use the worksheets in there for all the department heads to take back and to do an inventory and evaluation of where they are. That is due on November 1st, so by next Monday they will be done. We'll be scheduling a meeting for next week to get back with that group to see where we are. Now, I think we all recognize that one of the issues is that we really want to take the precaution of making sure that we have backup power. I think it's prudent anyway, because I think the illustrations that were given tonight of just general disaster preparedness when it would come to an ice storm or a tornado or something like that would be good for us to have backup power for our water plant and distribution, and also for our sewage treatment plant. There are going to be, I think, other issues that will come up, but we want to deal with those first. And just to let you know that we are serious about this, without any formal action of the council, our city administrator, Mr. John Brown, bought a generator that was a used generator that GTE was replacing, and I became aware of it and made the city aware of it and said, please make a bid on this if it comes available. I don't know that it's completely large enough to run our entire water plant, but it would run a significant portion of it. So we've already purchased some generation. Again, we felt it would be most appropriate to decide what it is we're going to need after we've done this evaluation. So our goal is to, by the end of the year, have a plan of what we are going to back up and have that ready for our budget year after January 1st. I'm also happy to report that the hospital has been doing a lot of work in preparing there, and I think they've felt very fortunate because some of the areas they felt that they would be most vulnerable, they are going to be replacing, and that these are items that were budgeted for this year. IV pumps, where they had a concern with the embedded systems within those, they are all being replaced and they are Y2K compliant. Also, they're trying to think what other system it was, another important system, but they are basically replacing what they had, and are feeling good about that. They have some backup generation. They feel that they would like to investigate some more. Water supply is also a concern. These are the kinds of issues that we're going to continue to talk about. I think we've discussed, as Mr. Shepard had pointed out, what we can do as government officials to let our primary vendors know that we're very serious about their monitoring and their actual readiness in terms of compliance. And it's good to see that there are guidelines for that now that we can draw from, and I can assure you that we will, as a city, put that in writing and to keep up with that. The challenge, I think, again, is to stay current with the information. Again, the action group that has formed and has begun to provide this has probably made Fairfield the most year 2000 literate community in possibly in the state of Iowa, per capita anyway. And I encourage that to keep going so that we can be the first Y2K or year 2000 inert community as well. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
I bet there.
We'll start from this side of the room.
This is on the radio, so you can get on the mic.
Yeah,
We're going to relay the
I will repeat the questions. Please.
Shepard, has the state delineated the interfaces with the federal government and modeled how to deal with shortcomings on the federal government part?
The question is, has the state modeled how to deal with shortcomings on the federal government's part with data? Mr. Shepard?
Yeah, the very first thing that happened when the federal government really got serious about year 2000 was we cataloged all the interfaces. Actually, most of the states had done that anyway. And actually, a fair number of the states were beginning to get concerned that the federal government hadn't gotten into the mainstream of this. And last November, the state of Pennsylvania convened a council of states. And one of the things we did at that council of states was we give the federal government a list of activities that they needed to really get into. And they did that through a series of legislation. I worked with actually Senator Moynihan's office out of the state of New York. He's been very, very active. He hasn't been given nearly as much credit as he deserves, but he's been very active with year 2000. And the very first thing we did is we cataloged those interfaces. So yeah, we're aware of where those are, and that's actually part of our year 2000 program, is to be aware of where those are and what effect those have.
Why don't we take the questions directed to Mr. Shepard and just let him field them directly?
I'm not sure I'm correct on this, but I heard that yesterday there was a meeting in Des Moines of which the federal government was involved that brought utility representatives from the Midwest together. And are you aware of that meeting, and perhaps would be able to report on what the status or summary of?
Yes, the question was there was a meeting yesterday in Des Moines with the Iowa Utilities Board and a number of federal officials that brought utilities together. And the question to me was, did I attend that meeting? Was I aware of that meeting? And what was the outcome of that? Yes, I did attend that meeting. I attended the morning session of that meeting. There were actually two sessions. The morning session, we had some folks from the federal government talk about the regulatory side of natural gas and electricity on the federal side, and some of those issues. The afternoon were actually workshops with federal regulators, state regulators, and utility companies, and any other interested parties to talk about what are we doing as far as year 2000 identification of problems, remediation testing, to do the kinds of exchange of information we talked about over here earlier with the fires. That was actually what the afternoon session was about, was to facilitate that kind of information. I'm expecting to get a report, a written report, on the afternoon session. Again, I couldn't attend. I had intended to do that, but I got called into the governor's office on something unrelated to year 2000. But I'm going to get a written report about that. One of the things that I have been roundly criticized for, and there's a fair amount of credibility in that criticism, unfortunately, is that I don't have a year 2000 website up at the state yet. When asked by legislators, I said, hey, I can either do it or I can talk about it, but you know, we're having trouble with resources. My year 2000 website is being accelerated because of some activity within state government right now. So we're hoping to have that website up by the middle of November. And it will actually be the, I want to put in a plug here, a real quick plug for something that's happening in state government that's going to have an effect on folks that really enjoy the web and folks that really enjoy computers. We are bringing a set of services to the web. It's called Iowa Access. It is bringing your state government to the World Wide Web. And what that's going to do, we're going to immediately put about 21 services online on the web on November 12th. It will be up November 12th. And so Iowa Access is actually the reason for me to accelerate this year 2000 website. But the information from that utilities board meeting and subsequent information will be forthcoming on that website. The Iowa Access website, we're having some discussions right now. The state website is www.state.ia.us. And you can get to almost every state by using that same thing. Use the 2-digit abbreviation for the state. It's www.state.abbreviation.us. And there are some folks that want a cute URL for the state of Iowa Access, and so we're still in the process.
You can guarantee on our local website we'll have that URL right there. So you just go to unbounded.net/Y2K. It'll be there for you.
But Iowa Access is a fundamental. It's a historic thing to bring state services to the World Wide Web, and I think it's really important that I mention that. Yes?
A lot of the literature suggests that we store food now. Has there been any analysis of the food distribution systems in the state of Iowa and nationally? I know it's privatized, you know, Hy-Vee, like, does Hy-Vee come forward and said, you know, things go haywire, we know what we can do to get food into Iowa, because there's a lot of produce comes from California and so on like that. So any thoughts along those lines?
The question was there have been some information out there that you should stockpile food and those kinds of things because of the coming year 2000 problems. And is that a good idea? I guess I'm taking the opposite approach to that. There are some people that want to err on the side of safety and say, okay, right now I'm going to recommend you stockpile food, you stockpile water, you do all those kinds of things. I haven't seen anything to me yet to indicate that we're going to have those kind of breakdowns. Okay, I think as we work through 1999, I may be able to come back and tell you, you know, it's September of '99, and you better start ordering the beans because, you know, I just have some problems. But I don't see anything right now that's going to cause those massive breakdowns in the supply system or in the fundamental utilities and those kinds of things.
So you don't think we'll have a fossil fuel problem?
Well, I'm not necessarily think we're going to have a fossil fuel problem. The supply lines are the things that we need to worry about. The embedded chips, the embedded systems are what are going to cause the problems for those supply systems. And I think there are enough valid workarounds. Again, you have to identify that you need a workaround, you have to put it in place. You have to test those systems. And I haven't seen anything yet to indicate to me that that's not going to happen in the next several months. We have, I think, as of today, 429 days. And so...
Excuse me, but this is in the United States. What about the 8 million barrels of oil a day that we import from foreign countries? That means that they have to be compliant as well?
Exactly. So, and again, I haven't seen anything yet to indicate that we're going to have massive breakdowns in the supply system. Yes.
I'm going to try to be very polite about this, but I'm wondering, Michael was quoting this newspaper article from Wisconsin. And the governor appointed these people to come together, as I understand it. And the Alliant lady, the vice president of Alliant for Wisconsin, was saying, you know, that they were trying to organize safe havens for people. Why is Wisconsin so worried and Iowa's not so worried?
Well, the answer, the question was, Wisconsin's organizing these safe havens for people, and they're addressing these issues. The government of Wisconsin. And why is Wisconsin so concerned and Iowa not so concerned? I think what Wisconsin probably has done is provide a lot more public information, and they provided it at a different level. They are saying, okay, you know, you need to own this problem, and you need to do everything yourself, and we'll try to do what we can do on the backside. In the state of Iowa, we're working on these issues through the Iowa Emergency Management Office, through the Iowa National Guard, through the Governor's Office, Department of Management. We're working with the federal government. We're working on this at all levels with the cities and with the counties. I'm preparing a year 2000 process guide right now that the governor will issue to each of the cities, the counties, and the school boards. As kind of a, if you don't have anything going yet, you might want to just use this and cover these bases. There are a lot of activities relative to year 2000. There are a lot of activities relative to emergency preparedness, but I think, I guess my take on Iowa is that we're taking a very level-headed approach. I'm not going to sound the clarion call that there are going to be massive problems. We're going to work on making sure that if, when we had the water problems in Des Moines in 1993, as you know, the water went out. We had about 300,000 people that didn't have water. The emergency management playbook talks about communities of 35,000 or less, how to handle that. If you have water missing in a community of greater than 35,000, you're on your own, good night. Well, we worked through that, and the United States military brought things in, and we were able to work through that. Now, in that particular case, they set up big rubber bladders on sand, and they brought in fresh water, and they supplied, I mean, we went to our local school and got water. I would submit that won't work in January 1 because the water's going to freeze. But exactly, but we are, as a group, we're working on all these things. I think our energies are better put in the next 6 months anyway into fixing the embedded system problems or working around the embedded system problems, understanding the relationship between various systems, and again, either fixing it. One of the things that the natural gas industry is doing, from what I understand, I've got this secondhand from some engineers, but they're looking at what are called valve schemes. And those valve schemes would be, if we don't think we've got the embedded system problem handled well enough, then what we do is we go out and we have a valve scheme where certain valves are open, certain valves are closed, and they're mechanically locked down. And the system works, and there are pressure reliefs and backoffs. I mean, there are safeguards in this, but it becomes a mechanically operated system for 2 or 3 months if it has to be, and then we fix the problem. They'll be doing remediation clear on into the year probably 2001 or 2002 on a lot of these systems. But I think if we work the issues, if every industry works the issues, and the more industry and the more utilities and the more government understands that people like you are informed and concerned and want to be part of the solution, then I think we can actually work through most of these problems. The question is, what about the folks in foreign countries? I told the legislature that we were going to have problems retaining computer programmers. And we had some people leave state government because they had good job offers. But the fact of the matter is that most of our computer programmers stayed there because they love us. But they stayed there. Well, what I went to an international conference in Orlando, Florida 2 weeks ago. And what we were told at this conference by the Gardner Group is that the next wave is coming about January of next year, because Europe has got the Eurodollar pretty much squared away. They've been worried about the Eurodollar and the conversion and all the things happening in the European community. And they're going to start to concentrate very, very heavily on year 2000, starting about January of 1999. And they're going to start to try to get it done in a year. Well, they're going to put their Eurodollars out there in massive amounts. And we're going to see massive defections from the East Coast and West Coast, according to the Gardner Group, of computer technology professionals. And then the West Coast and the East Coast will raid the Midwest, and things will move back to the coast. It's the 1880s backwards. So we've got Gardner, we've got the Europe to worry about, we've got the East, the Far East to worry about, we've got the Asian countries to worry about, because right now most of the Asian countries aren't recognizing or even starting into year 2000 issues.
You know, I heard a saying the other day, I read it on the internet, it takes a woman 9 months to make a baby, but 9 women can't make a baby together in 1 month. And despite the best of intentions, there's a deadline on this thing. And in many areas, no matter how many people you throw at it or how much money, that deadline is not going to be met. And to a great extent, when you study this problem, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a wide range of opinions among very authoritative, knowledgeable people as to what the actual outcome of this is going to be. There's a spectrum. And I would say that you lean somewhat toward the optimistic side of the spectrum, but there are equally, if not more qualified people who are at a rather extreme, the alarm end of the spectrum. And there's a reality out there that's going to hit us in 14 months. And that reality is to some extent influenced by our opinions, because according to how we feel, we might initiate bank runs or we might not. But to a certain extent, that reality is objective and it's concrete, and it's going to be what it's going to be regardless of our attitude toward it. And I think it's wise and prudent for us. I mean, we can't work on embedded chips or fix your software. That's not within our expertise. But what we can do is prepare on an individual level. And there's another saying that's kind of popular in Y2K circles these days: hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Now, preparing for the very worst can get rather extreme, but I don't think it's prudent to discourage people from taking a certain amount of personal preparation steps, because you can't say with certainty that some of these more...
Rick, do you have a question for Mr. Shepard?
Do you have a question here?
Do you have a question for Mr. Shepard?
We're on the respond to what I'm saying.
We're on the radio, and we're creating some dead air time here. If you could come to a question, we'll repeat it.
I think it's going to be answered here. I think it's very important what he's saying here.
Yes, it's very important.
Right now, and what he's saying is extremely important. So I think you should just let him.
Yeah, I'm a couple sentences away from finishing.
Okay.
A lot of people are, there's a certain emotional reaction to this thing. My wife says, I have an intuition that it's going to be okay in Fairfield. But there's no facts beneath that. It's just a feeling and a hope, really. And you can't say with certainty that the reality of this thing when it hits us isn't going to be actually much more towards the extreme end of the spectrum. So as a public spokesman on Y2K, I would encourage you, and I just wanted to put out the word to this audience because a rather opposite impression has been given, to have people take it very seriously, and don't discourage them from making personal preparations, at least up to, within a certain range of reasonability.
To recap in a nutshell, so everybody that didn't hear that, it was felt that I rather discourage people from taking personal preparation, and that I take the optimistic side of the spectrum, and that's somewhat of a disservice. What I'll tell you is that it's my personal preference, and that's all I ever said. It's my personal preference to take a look at this thing through about mid-1999 and then make an assessment. I think it's entirely too early to make that assessment on survival supplies and those kinds of things.
Yes, but if we wait, won't there be a problem in getting said supplies?
Well, we had the supply systems are fully intact in 1999.
Yes, but only so much can be produced in such a period of time.
Well, one thing is that, a friend of mine was down in Florida last month, or whenever it was, when this hurricane came. They gave a hurricane watch in the morning. The shelves were empty. Within hours after that kind of a warning, if you come and say in September 99, like you mentioned, okay, I guess it's going to be worse than I thought. There are not going to be the kind of supplies that the whole population would need at that point. So if people slowly are getting, prepared, not in any drastic way like Rick said, but in a careful way, now it won't cause that kind of panic later.
Okay, the statement was that if people wait until late 1999 to become prepared, that there may not be supplies available, and that it's not a bad idea to become prepared over time. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. And I fully support that. If you feel that that's what you want to do, I think that's fine. I don't think it is a service to you, for the government, to tell you right now today, go out and buy survival supplies, that we're really headed for some serious, serious problems. Well, I'm trying to get an assessment, the best assessment I can, of where the supply lines are, of where the infrastructure is, of where our systems are, to see if I can determine, make the best determination, what is going to happen, what kind of prognostication we can make. And again, if you feel that it's prudent to buy survival supplies, I think that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, well, a couple of things I've got. First off is with I watched the Senate hearing on October 2nd, where Senator Harding was the head of this, and the governor from Utah, and the Major General from the National Guard was there, and representative appointed by Terry Branstad, even as head of FEMA. And on there it was stated, I mean, not strongly indicated, but it was stated that the federal government plans to invoke martial law on New Year's Eve of 2000. And my concern, I can look at, losing my electricity and appliances and all these conveniences and everything. That's one thing. What really scares me, that doesn't scare me, but what scares me is what happens when martial law takes over. What happens to my rights? What happens is when the military can come in and they can take my possessions or my firearms or they can control me? What happens to the rights of the citizen at a very vulnerable time in world history when total chaos would happen? Now, if the Senate is talking martial law, and already the Des Moines Register had a headline story on about the National Guard in Iowa becoming ready now. They're preparing this far in advance. And then we're told not to prepare in advance. We should wait until the last minute. To me, panic is waiting until the last minute. And that's when you're going to have total chaos. I'm just concerned. I don't want to create alarm, but I mean, these are the last few weeks thinking about it. These are the things that have really stuck in my brain.
The gentleman stated that he's seen a hearing on television that the federal government stated they intend to impose martial law December 31st, 1999. And I can tell you, I have absolutely not heard that at all. That's certainly a contingency if we have a massive disaster. It's always a contingency if we have massive problems, no matter where it is, a riot.
Mrs. Hamilton has a copy of the videotape if you want to see it. I'm sure she, I mean, I gave it to her, I copied it. So she's got that where that copy.
Well, one of the things that happens with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, one of the things that happens with the state on a regular basis is we look at scenarios, and we look at worst case scenarios. We have worst case scenarios for all kinds of things. The nuclear power plant at Palo exploding from terrorists, pulmonary anthrax being released in a tumble, all kinds of things. We look at those worst case scenarios. But what we do is we play those out. And I think probably if there was a mention by the Federal Emergency Management Agency that would you invoke martial law, there is a scenario that if we have breakdowns and we have riots and we have things, sure, martial law is always a possibility, but that...
It wasn't stated as a question on this tape. It was stated as a fact that they already planned it.
Instead of me trying to respond to a tape I haven't seen, I guess I'd have to look at the tape. It would be a disservice to me try to respond to that, but I have honestly heard nothing about the plan to invoke martial law anytime.
What about National Guard in Iowa?
Yes, can I make a comment? I think in deference to Mr. Shepard, I think we invited him down here really to talk about what Iowa is doing. And I think that he has a full-time job in preparing the state. I think they've done it so far in a very intelligent way. And I think that our questions should really be in that regard, understanding how the workarounds and how the fixes can really get to answer and fill that void of where some of those doubts still exist in terms of whether we can really be ready how prepared do you really need to be? And I think that that's a very logical way to approach it at this point. I don't feel like putting Mr. Shepherd on the spot, so to speak, to address the extreme side of it is appropriate at this point.
Are there a few more things to worry about than putting a person on the spot, though?
Oh, it's not about that. I'm just saying that.
Well, I think you got tact and being kind to this gentleman for coming and speaking to us. At the same time, everybody has some very deep concerns about what is approaching this millennium.
But that's not his area of expertise.
He's here giving his own personal view on what he's going to be doing December 31st, 1999.
Could we kind of bring this back into a little bit of perspective? Not that it's not in perspective, but keep in mind.
Well, I have no most respect for this gentleman.
I'm talking about the perspective here is two different issues are being addressed, and let me see if I can bring it back here. Mr. Shepherd has talked about how to develop compliance, how to become Y2K ready with regard to the government. Our agenda is a little bit different here. We want to know about food and water and energy and medical supplies and resources and how it tracks. And
so we being the Fairfield Y2K Action Group, that's what Mark's talking about. Here local, that's what we're interested in finding information about.
And one, with a great deal of respect, that's where we're targeting, Tom. You know, we want to see if in fact Alliant can't deliver for some reason, for a number of days, what type of scenario, you know, and again, this is not to put you on the spot because you pretty much voted personally. You said, based on the information that you have at hand, you don't see an emergency of that magnitude occurring. But let's hear, for the sake of the local, you know, for the sake of our concerns, let's pretend for a moment that something did go down and it was extended for some period of time, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, who knows what. We are asking you from our side, what kind of direction could you give us on the levels of food, on the levels of energy, and what type of support can we interface with our state government and local governments?
Well, the best answer I can give, I understand that everybody's concerned about this, and you're very genuine in your concern, and I don't want to give you any government answers, okay, because I don't like government answers. But I can tell you right now, I can't respond to National Guard questions because I'm not the National Guard. The Adjutant General of the National Guard, General Lawson, would be happy to either come down or send somebody down to respond to the National Guard concerns and the martial law concerns. The Emergency Management Office actually has folks that are experts in telling you what to order and where to get that stuff from if you have those concerns, if you want to get survival supplies, if you want to have a community effort at survival supplies. They have people that can help you with that. I honestly can't answer those questions. I can only give you, number one, what state government's response is internally to information technology and embedded systems. And I can tell you what my personal view is on those kinds of concerns.
Thank you.
Yes.
To what extent have Iowa utilities reviewed the possibility of problems beginning this January 1st, 1999 related to the year 2000?
The question was, to what extent have Iowa utilities looked at problems this January 1999 relative to problems with the utility, both generation and transmission, the entire utility problem. And it's my understanding that that's what the North American Electrical Reliance Council looks at. Is we are in a ERC region of states, and actually 2 provinces in Canada, Iowa and Minnesota, Illinois, and North Dakota, South Dakota, and I believe Nebraska. And that region looks at power within that region. We have cogeneration plants, we sell within that region, then we sell between regions. But they're actually looking at that. They have work groups that are specifically cross-utility work groups that actually are members of various utilities that look at that. To get any more into detail about that would be the province of the Iowa Utilities Commission or the individual utilities. I don't have a lot of technical expertise in the utility end of it, but that's one of the things that I want to get on the websites. When I talk to business and industry about contingency planning, and the contingency planning about what if things go down and go wrong on year 2000 and where are you at. One of the things we look at is their site plan. That's we look at their disaster plan. The disaster plan contains a site plan. The site plan talks about water and power and those things.
Are you concerned that the state's computers will go down in 2 months?
We'll go down in 2 months?
Is that a possibility?
I would say it's an extremely remote possibility. I don't see that that's really on the horizon, that the state's computers will go down in 2 months.
Have you looked at that?
We've tested scenarios. We've tested various scenarios based on receiving bad data, based on a number of problems with electrical generation. We have emergency power generators. We have an uninterruptible power supply for all of our mainframe systems. And we've extensively tested those systems. And we, right now, on our emergency generators, have maintenance computers that roll over to 1900 on January 1, 2000. So we know that, number one, our electrical generation capability for our computer systems is not available to us January 1, 2000 because of that. And we, in the next 429 days, will either develop a fix or a workaround. One of the things we can do is we can take the fail-safe mechanism off of the Caterpillar engines that run our emergency generators that check the maintenance information. And we will just be on our honor to change the oil and change the filters.
Are you serviced by Alliant at your home?
No, I'm serviced by Mid-American Energy.
Okay. We're serviced by Alliant, and any encouragement you can give them to send somebody here again who knows about Y2K, we greatly appreciate it, because someone with your stature they might listen to. We invited them here. They didn't come. We're very concerned because we are informed. I'm not a Chicken Little yet, but I'm in the egg. And I don't know if I'm going to hatch or not. I came here tonight hoping you would kill the egg. I don't want to be a chicken. But I've read all over the internet, time and time and time and time again, alarmists, survivalists, Chicken Littleists, everywhere. I don't know where you're getting your information that makes you not stock up food. I want to know what you know. I can't find it. On your website, put it on there, and I'll spread it all around this town, and I'll keep the Chicken Littles quiet, okay? But right now, I'm hatching. I came here tonight hoping I would get colder, but I'm getting hotter. Because here's the problem. You're feeding us too much abstractions. We need details. I want to know how many of the 170,000 embedded systems in Alliance system have been checked so far. How many people are on it? What their work schedule is, what their milestones are. I want to be involved because, to tell you the truth, we got here to this problem because we trusted everyone else to take care of the problems for us. And we've lost a lot of credibility with this representational leadership. And one of your main problems is inspiring us to believe in your abstractions when we know abstractions can mean anything to us. And so now we're grasping for these details. How many systems are there? Who's on it? Who's doing it? Why should we trust it? What oversight is there on it? And we need some hard data. I like what you're doing. You really have inspired me to think that there is somebody up there attacking the problem. I'm telling you, my personal needs, I need more detail. And any way you want to give it to me, I'll spread it around. Okay?
Well, I hope, as opposed to repeating it, I'll just make a statement here. I hope that what I have encouraged you to do is to communicate with Alliant and encourage Alliant, along with the state of Iowa, to meet the guidelines of the Electric Reliability Council. Those are some pretty stringent guidelines. One of the things I intend to do is I intend to personally get back with Alliant and ask Bob Newell if he will come to Fairfield, because he's the guy that's in charge of the entire. He's the gentleman that's in charge of Alliant's entire year 2000 program. The buck stops actually with the CEO, but he is the gentleman that's in charge of year 2000. I hope nobody leaves here with a misconception that I drove all the way down here from Des Moines to tell you that nothing's wrong, because that's not why I came here. That's not my message. So I understand your frustration. If I lived in Fairfield, I would be after Alliant to provide more detail and more information. What are you doing? How are you doing it? How is it progressing? And I would encourage you to do that. Again, the state of Iowa will encourage utilities to do that. One of the things we were told by utilities yesterday is that until the legislation came along last week, that they were afraid that disclosure would open them up to lawsuits. Okay, the legislation's here. So that excuse has evaporated. And what we need to do is we need, as government, we need to encourage more utilities to give full disclosure, to give better disclosure, to make sure everybody understands where your utility's at. You own it, you pay for it, whether you're a stockholder or not, but you're paying for it.
We want the truth.
Exactly.
We don't want them telling us, oh, everything's okay. If there's something we need to know, we want to know it. We don't want it sugar-coated. We just want them, we want you to encourage them to just tell us like it is.
Well, and one of the things that other states have done is they've taken our red, green, yellow chart and invoked that in their states because they didn't have that information in their own state, the state governments. And one of the things that Alliant may need to do is develop some kind of a timeline, an aggressive timeline with some details in it and report on a regular basis. I think that would be, to me, that would be something that would answer a lot of your questions.
I'm not usually one to encourage new legislation, but what's the matter with having legislation requiring all infrastructure companies to give that kind of information to the state government and to the public at large on the progress of the program?
The comment was he normally doesn't encourage legislation, but he thinks it would be a good idea to have legislation that would compel utility and other infrastructure companies to regularly report their status and progress. And I guess I would say that I think that would probably be a worthwhile piece of legislation. That would be something that you get into regulated and non-regulated utilities, but since there is a public interest, there's a vested public interest here, and there are emergency management concerns, life safety concerns, that may be a valid piece of legislation. I think that's something that we need to work with the local legislators and with the governor on.
Something you could mention to the governor.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Along the same lines, I think I'm really impressed with the way you're able to manage the state government's compliance with these color-coded reports. And I just keep feeling this longing to have you apply the same procedures that you're doing within the state government to our basic utility companies that we are so dependent on. You can have some control over their compliance efforts as you do within the state. That would be very reassuring to us the way we collapse it back and find out that they weren't competent or capable of being compliant.
Yeah, the comment was that she encouraged me she felt very strongly that the utility company should be compelled to present a color-coded report or some meaningful report to all of you that indicates where they're at. I think a couple of action items that I'm going to take away from this meeting, actually there'll be 3 action items I take away from this meeting. One of those is to propose to the legislative liaison for the governor, the gentleman that formulates the governor's legislation, this very legislation. What would you think about that to compel that to happen? I'm going to also take that to the Iowa Utilities Board. The United Utilities Board is looking for what can we do, what should we do. There's a continuum of do nothing to force people to do everything. Where on that continuum should we be and what kind of things should we do? And I think this is a valid action item. This is something that I need to take back. And I'll get name, phone number. I think the city councilman would be an excellent person for me to deal with, to discuss things with and to get back to. But I will give what status I have on those recommendations. So I'm not going to drive away from Fairfield. See, I have relatives here, so I come back to Fairfield regularly, so I can't just go away and not see you anymore. But I will report back on where this goes and what the feeling is in state government. And I may ask some people here for some encouragement, some letters or emails or those kinds of things, and I'll tell you where to send them. Because I'm a proactive kind of person. I understand your frustration. I also want to get with the emergency management folks and ask them what they feel, how they feel about the individual hazard mitigation and the individual contingency plans, and how the Iowa Emergency Management Office can help or assist or provide information on how you can individually put together your own hazard mitigation plan, and not relieving the government of our obligation, but doing that in addition to.
Is there a legislative oversight committee or anything of that nature dealing with your area, even if it was just general, not specific?
Well, there's a legislative subcommittee called the Oversight and Communications Subcommittee. They're actually part of the Appropriations Committee, and they oversee information technology services, and they oversee the year 2000 process. So,
can you provide a member to those committees?
The chair on the House side is Representative Libby Jacobs, and this is for anybody that would like to email or anything. Libby Jacobs is the chair on the House side of the Oversight Committee, and Jack Reif is the senator that's on the Senate side of that committee. These are joint committees.
Another question, we have a government that understands that right now we're changing leadership. Do you have any idea whether Mr. Vilsack or Lightfoot, or how they're feeling? Do you feel that we're going into the critical year?
Sure.
Obviously, and I think it's going to be important.
Well, I can tell you that personally that both Tom Vilsack and Jim Lightfoot have an understanding of what the year 2000 problem is about, what the gravity is. I had done congressional briefings for Jim Ross Lightfoot when he was a representative, and have worked with him off and on since he's been out of the House of Representatives. And I worked extensively with Tom Vilsack when he was a senator. We used to do technology initiatives in the Senate, and he was one of the senators I worked with on a regular basis. They both have knowledge of the year 2000 problem, and they both endorse the year 2000 problem being handled from a very high executive level. So from the standpoint of who do you vote for governor, of those two, they are on a par. They have, I think, both have an appreciation of it.
There is, Alliant has done a brochure that they've sent to all of their customers, and something more standard, I think, that they had sent to businesses and bigger customers. Are you aware they have any kind of a public relations budget, and whether we could ask that they would start to address directly some of the concerns that people have through PSAs?
Well, I don't know the extent of Alliance's public relations budget or what kind of resources they have available for public outreach. One of the things they really need to improve on is the information that they put out and the accuracy of the information they put out. I have been personally disappointed, extremely dismayed at some of the actions of some of the various utility companies. I am a Mid-American Energy customer in central Iowa. And at the state fair, Mid-American Energy had a booth on year 2000, and they were handing out a lot of very bad recommendations and information on year 2000. It was kind of like, if we have you do all these things, we don't have to worry about the problem. And 2 days into the state fair, they scrapped their booth and started handing out mouse pads and cap snafflers or something. They just stopped the year 2000 thing because it was a very ill-conceived effort. It really was pretty awful. So I think the utility companies, I honestly, at this point in the game, don't have a good read on Mid-American Energy, the company that services my area. But that's something that I intend to concentrate on in December, January, and February of this year and next year to make sure that we get things.
Yes, sir. My specific question was, granted, all the different utility companies in Iowa supplying power to individual areas, they may, in their own infrastructure, solve their problems, do distribution or whatever. My question is there any kind of auditing the state is trying to work with all the utility companies on the pathway of energy? When we have IES delivers or Alliant gives us energy directly, they get their power plants. They buy their coal from some distributor who gets it to them on a railway, which gets it from some mine who buys their equipment from Caterpillar. You know, there's a whole pathway of things that we need to be concerned about. I'm wondering if the state has an auditing pathway that they can say, okay, these people need energy, you're generating it this way, how far have you gone to the source? Have you checked every, because infrastructure, the embedded systems problem, that's pretty much internal. I'm not so worried about that. They can be completely compliant and still fail because of the larger problem, the interface with all these other companies. And that's basically my
Sure. The comment or question was that, does the state have a way to audit the supply line for the utility companies? That is kind of it in a nutshell. Do they have the utility companies work the issues on, can they get coal? Do they have oil or petroleum to fire their generating plants? And is the supply line secure? Is the supply line, has that issue been worked? We know from dealing with the utility companies that they are beginning to ask those questions, and that's as far as I'll go with that. That's not good enough, obviously. Does the state have a way to audit that? Section 476 of the Iowa Code specifically talks about the Utilities Board, and Section 476 of the Iowa Code says that the Utilities Board is charged with ensuring safe and reasonably adequate facilities. Now that's what the Iowa Code says. The Utilities Board can ensure safe and reasonably adequate facilities. And we're trying to encourage the Utilities Board, and the Utilities Board is taking this very seriously, that we should take that reasonably adequate facilities and make it just as big as we can make it. Now, I'm not a proponent of big government, but in this case, you need the biggest government you can get to sit on these utility companies to make sure that things are being handled. In some cases, there are going to be issues that are out of their control, and we need to find out what those are and find out whose control they're in. But again, 476 of the code is what we're using, and that's part of what I'm going to take back to the Utilities Board, is that we need reasonable and adequate disclosure from the utilities to the folks that are buying the power, to the folks that rely on their service, on whether or not it's going to be there, what actions are being taken to make sure that it's there, and what kind of mitigation activities are in place. What's the schedule and where are we at on that continuum?
I have a friend who works for Alliance, and I had a conversation with him about this about a week ago. He's not an official spokesman, and it was a private conversation, but he said that they've been talking a lot about it at the plant, and he's buying a generator.
Yeah, the gentleman's statement was that he has a friend that works at Alliant, and that his friend is going to buy a generator. And my oldest brother is going to buy a generator. He's going to buy 100. Now, I told my oldest brother to use the plugins that are on the generator. Don't try to wire the generator into your house. It's not adequate. You're going to cause a fire. You're going to hurt yourself. So just use the plugins on the generator. But in my case, at this point, again, I don't have enough information now to indicate that I'm going to need to buy a generator. And I'm going to be working those issues with our Mid-American Energy.
Part of this is the issue with some of these companies, it seems to me, is somewhat similar to the U.S. government's problem with Iraq, where we want to send in inspectors and see for ourselves exactly what's going on, and they're doing this little dance around. And part of it is a political issue. I don't know about specifically about Alliance. I do know that a lot of companies, especially if they're publicly traded, it's a big issue politically. They come out and make a statement about Y2K, after we're going to put $1 billion for solving this problem. It could affect their position in the stock market, and so they're very protective of that information. I'm wondering, is the state capable, or is there any legislation pending, or is there any approach to forcing some sort of an inspection, an outsider stepping into the situation like yourself and looking at their compliance? Because if you're only relying on what they tell you, there is an internal reporting as the box is putting on the accounts. It doesn't really necessarily mean anything as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. It's like self-reporting on your year 2000 code. Yeah, the statement was, does the state or does the government have the authority to actually go in and require adequate and accurate reporting of information based on these utilities? And I'll tell you right now that the state only has oversight over a portion of the utilities in the state of Iowa, because it's basically the investor-owned utilities that we have code authority over. So we don't actually cover the entire spectrum. The federal government, when I was hard-pressed yesterday, this is the agenda from yesterday's utilities meeting. We had a lady named Kathleen Sherman with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that talked about natural gas and the status of the year 2000 for natural gas. And now this is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and she's telling us about natural gas. Now, you might at first assume that they have province over everything natural gas in the United States. And she told us during the course of her talk that her regulatory commission really only had about 22% of the natural gas under it because of various laws. It was regulated by other areas of the government. So I think one of the things that we may need to do in the very, very near term at the federal level is to deal with the regulation issues and to deal with the disclosure issues. I think right now, the regulation, we're not really too wrapped around the axle about the rates and all those kinds of things. What we want to know is, will this be available? Will you have service to customers January 1, 2000? And because of the supply line problems that have been mentioned here, it may not be January 1, 2000 we see the failure. It may be January 10th or 12th or 21st. That's when they run out of coal, that's when they run out of gas, okay? And that's the very candid statement. That's something that your typical government person doesn't want to bring up. But anyway, that's I think that's a very important issue, and that's, again, one of those action items I'll take back to the Utilities Commission.
We're going to close the formal part of our meeting right now. We want one more word from Michael.
We want to give a big thanks to KMCD for putting this out on the radio, and remind everybody that you can get this live broadcast right off of our website at unbounded.net/Y2K. So anybody who missed the meeting, they can get it there. Other than that, we'll have further updates and news on Y2K on Saturday mornings at 9 on KMCD. And thanks to FPAC as well.
I'd also like to give a big thank you to Tom Shepard again for coming. He is only one person working on this problem. We can only hope that there are many, many thousands of people with his energy and intelligence all across the nation working on it. Another event that may be of interest at the LDS Church in Suburban Heights on Saturday at 9 a.m., 9 to 3. In fact, there is a family preparedness day that they are sponsoring, and everyone is welcome. At the LDS Church this Saturday, October 31st, from 9 to 3.
Mormon Church.
Yes. We're bringing the formal part to a close. If people want to continue with discussions, I believe we're off the air at this point.
We are off the air at this point.
We're off the air.
We'll be around to answer any questions. If you have any questions about the news or anything like that, we'll be around to help you out.
We've only covered a portion of the topic this evening. There's certainly a lot more to discuss and more forums to come, I'm sure.
Do you have a question?